In the burning Arizona sun of 1887, a lone cowboy with a scarred shoulder and an 8-year-old daughter in a tiny black and white dress rode into a valley stained with old blood. He only wanted to buy land. Instead, he was given an ultimatum: marry the chief's hidden daughter, rumored to be so hideous that even wolves turned away, or ride out and never return. He accepted. 3 days later, bullets flew, veils fell, and a little girl with a box of face powder changed everything. What began as a desperate bargain became the legend of the scar that shone brighter than gold under the desert sun. Stay until the final gunshot and the last tear on a child's powder-covered fingers. You won't believe how beauty was born from battle. Hit subscribe, drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see where this story is finding new homes tonight. Now, let the sun set on Silver Creek Valley. Press play. The summer of 1887 pressed down on Arizona territory like a branding iron. Heat shimmered off the red rock walls of Silver Creek Valley, turning the air itself into a furnace. A single rider came down the switchback trail, dust rising behind him in slow, lazy coils. Maverick Kane sat easy in the saddle, one hand on the reins, the other resting on the walnut stock of a battered Winchester. His face was burned the color of saddle leather, eyes the pale gray of winter sky. A 3-day beard shadowed a jaw that had forgotten how to smile. Tied to the saddle horn by a rawhide string rode a little girl, no taller than a fence post. Ellie Kane, 8 years old, black and white gingham dress, sun-bleached almost gray, brown vest 2 sizes too big, and a pint-sized Stetson cocked over one eye. A Colt cap and ball revolver carved from pine hung at her hip. She had sanded it herself with a piece of broken glass. When the wind lifted the brim of her hat, you could see the same stubborn set to her mouth that lived on her father's face. They had been riding since before dawn, following a creek that had forgotten how to run. The valley below looked promising once: cottonwoods along a dry arroyo, the bones of an old corral, foundations of a ranch house burned black years ago. Maverick had heard the story in Tucson. Apache raid, 1879. White men dead, cattle scattered, land left to ghosts and lizards. Perfect, he had thought. Ghosts don't file claims. He reined in at the old well. The windlass was gone, but the stone curb still stood. Ellie slid down first, boots hitting dust with a puff. She tugged a tin canteen from the saddlebag and drank like a man, throat working, water running down her chin onto the vest. Maverick watched the ridges, the way a wolf watches before it drinks. Movement flickered on the rimrock. One moment empty, the next a dozen riders sat their ponies in perfect silence, feathers stirring in the hot wind. Apache. War paint faint, rifles across their thighs. The man in the center was tall, even by Apache measure, hair silvered at the temples, face cut by old knife scars that pulled the left corner of his mouth into something that wasn't quite a smile. Tachi. The name drifted up from half-remembered saloon talk, the same Tachi who had once ridden 100 miles to burn a stage station because the driver whipped an Apache boy. Maverick eased his hand away from the Winchester. No sense dying over a gesture. Tachi spoke first, English slow and deliberate, every word placed like a cartridge into a cylinder. "This land is not for sale, white man." Maverick touched the brim of his hat. "Wasn't aiming to insult anyone. I've got $380 saved, honest. Thought maybe we could talk." Tachi's eyes flicked to Ellie, who stood hip-shot beside her father, one small hand resting on the wooden revolver. Something unreadable passed across the chief's face. "Money buys nothing here," he said. "But a man who wishes to plant roots on our mother's body must become family. You will marry my daughter, Yuma. You will stand with us when the blue coats come, or you ride out when the sun will not see you again." The ponies shifted, boughs creaked, Ellie looked up at her father, eyes narrowed against the glare. "Pa," she said quietly. "Is he serious?" "Looks that way, kid." Tachi waited. The silence stretched until the heat itself seemed to listen. Maverick felt the weight of 7 years on the drift. Cold camps, empty pockets, the grave of a wife he couldn't save from fever back in the nations. He looked at the blackened timbers of the old ranch house, then at the little girl in the oversized vest, who had no mother and no home but the one he carried on his back. He took a slow breath that tasted of creosote and gun oil. 3 days to the wedding? He asked. Tachi inclined his head once. Maverick stepped down from the saddle, boots thudding into dust older than treaties. He reached up and lifted Ellie to the ground. She landed light, hand still on her wooden gun. "Then reckon we'll be staying," he said. Far above, a buzzard turned a slow circle against the hammered copper sky, waiting to see what the desert would claim next. The buzzard was still circling when the war party closed around them, silent as smoke. No one touched their weapons. They didn't need to. 2 young braves took Dusty's reins. Another lifted Ellie onto a bareback pony as if she weighed nothing. Maverick walked in the center, boots dragging furrows in the dust, the sun hammering the back of his neck like it wanted to drive him into the ground. They rode single file up a hidden trail behind a knife-edge ridge and dropped into a narrow box canyon. 30-odd brush wickiups and hide teepees huddled against the north wall, smoke rising thin and straight. Children scattered like quail. Women paused with water jars on their heads. Every eye followed the white man and the little girl in the man-sized vest. Tachi pointed to a lone wickiup at the edge of camp. "You sleep there, 3 sunsets. Then you marry, or you die." He turned his pony and was gone. Inside the lodge, it smelled of cedar smoke and horse sweat. A single buffalo robe lay on the packed earth. Ellie kicked off her boots, crawled straight under the robe, and was asleep before Maverick loosened his gun belt. He sat outside until the stars came out, listening to the camp settle, the low murmur of Apache voices, a baby crying, the far-off howl of a coyote answered by another farther west. First dawn, Ellie woke him by poking his ribs with her wooden Colt. "Pa, the veiled lady's watching us." Across the clearing stood a lone figure, wrapped head to toe in white buckskin, face hidden behind a thick veil that reached to her waist. Only her eyes showed, dark and unblinking. When Maverick stood, she melted back between 2 lodges like heat haze. By midday, the whispers had names. Yuma the Scarred, the one the wolves marked. Even the mirror turns away. Old women crossed themselves with Apache signs when she passed. Young warriors looked in the other direction. Only the children dared stare, and then only until an elder cuffed them. Ellie, unbothered, marched straight up to the white figure that evening, carrying 2 sticks of rock candy bought in Tucson. She laid them on a flat rock outside the woman's lodge and sprinted back, giggling. The next morning, the candy was gone. In its place lay a tiny bracelet of blue trade beads and porcupine quills. Second day, Maverick tried to work, anything to keep his hands busy. He fixed a broken travois pole, helped 2 boys water the horse herd, and even patched a bullet hole in a water skin. The men watched, arms folded, giving him room but no welcome. When he passed Yuma's lodge, she was always there, motionless, veil stirring in the furnace wind. He tipped his hat once. The veil dipped, almost a nod, then nothing. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. Moonlight striped the lodge through the smoke hole. She crawled into Maverick's lap, voice small. "Pa, why do they hate her? They're afraid of what they don't understand, kid." "You afraid?" He thought about it. "Reckon I'm more afraid of riding out of here with nothing again." Third morning, the wind shifted, bringing the smell of sage and something metallic, distant. Ellie was already up, sitting cross-legged outside the lodge, braiding grass into a tiny horse. Maverick stepped past her and froze. Half a mile down canyon, heat waves danced over the sand. Through them, he saw blue coats, sunlight flashing on carbine barrels, a guidon hanging limp. 12, maybe 15 troopers, moving slowly, keeping to the shadows of the cottonwoods. He counted 3 pack mules, ammunition boxes. They weren't lost. He walked straight to Tachi's fire. The chief sat sharpening a skinning knife, not looking up. Bluecoats coming. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow, before light. They got a map and bad intentions. Tachi tested the blade against his thumb, drew a bead of blood, and nodded once. Then tonight you choose, white man. Ride away with your money still in your pocket, or stand on the rimrock with us when the shooting starts. He finally met Maverick's eyes. After that, if you still breathe, you marry my daughter. Behind them, Ellie stood listening, small fists clenched around the grass horse until it snapped in two. Maverick looked toward the ridge where the soldiers would come. The sun was a white coin nailed to the sky, and every shadow looked like a rifle barrel. "Reckon I already chose," he said. The moon bled out behind a thin rack of cloud just before the false dawn. Maverick lay on the rimrock beside Tachi and 6 silent warriors, belly to the warm stone, Winchester already slick with sweat. Below, the dry creek bed lay silver and empty. Ellie had been carried to the hidden cave with the women and children hours earlier. Her last words were a fierce whisper. "Don't let them take our house, Pa." First warning was the creak of saddle leather drifting up the canyon like a ghost. Then came the low jingle of curb chains and the soft thud of shod hooves on sand. 15 troopers in dusty blue, carbines out, moving in 2 columns. The captain rode point, saber scabbard tapping his boot, face hard under the campaign hat. Tachi lifted one finger. No one breathed. The soldiers reached the narrows. A sergeant raised a fist. The column halted. The captain swung down, unrolled a map, and tapped it with a gloved finger. Right where the camp slept. A warrior beside Maverick drew his bow until the stave groaned. Tachi shook his head. Not yet. Then a horse snorted, loud as a gunshot in the stillness. A trooper's head snapped up. "Injuns!" he yelled, and the canyon exploded. Carbines flashed orange. Bullets whined off stone, showering sparks. Apache arrows answered, silent and faster than thought. The lead trooper took one through the throat and toppled without a sound. Horses screamed, rearing, dumping riders. Powder smoke rolled thick as morning fog. Maverick worked the Winchester steadily, liver slick in his hands. Crack, crack, crack! A sergeant spun, clutching his side. Another soldier tried to swing his horse toward the camp mouth. Maverick's bullet took the animal in the chest, and it crashed, pinning the rider beneath. Tachi was everywhere at once, knife in one hand, old dragoon pistol in the other, shouting orders in Apache. 2 warriors went down in the first minute, one with half his face gone, the other crawling toward cover with his guts shining wet. The captain rallied his men behind an overturned pack mule, bullets kicking dust around Maverick's head. A slug tore the brim of his hat clean off. He rolled, came up firing, and saw Tachi stagger. A .45 had punched through the meat of the chief's thigh. Blood soaked the leggings black. Maverick lunged across open ground, grabbed Tachi under the arms, and dragged him behind a boulder. The chief tried to stand, face gray, but the leg buckled. Down in the creek bed, the fight turned hand to hand. Knives flashed. A trooper clubbed a warrior with his carbine butt. An Apache woman burst from the shadows with a hatchet and buried it in the soldier's skull. Then Maverick saw her. Yuma. She came out of the smoke like vengeance itself. Veil torn half away, white buckskin streaked red. A Spencer carbine too big for her barked once, twice. A trooper dropped his saber and clutched his belly. She worked the lever with furious speed, eyes burning above the ragged cloth. A big corporal grabbed her from behind, arm around her throat, dragging her backward. The veil ripped completely free. Moonlight hit the scar, a thick, livid rope running from hairline to jaw, pale against bronze skin. The corporal laughed. "Got the ugly one," and raised his Colt. A small shape flew out of the darkness. Ellie, dress flapping like a battle flag, clutching her dead mother's tin powder box. She hurled it with all 8 years of fury. The lid burst. White talc exploded in the corporal's face. He screamed, blinded, clawing at his eyes. Yuma twisted, drove her knife upward under the ribs. The corporal dropped, coughing pink froth. The captain, last man standing, backed toward his panicked horse, revolver empty. Tachi rose on his good leg, used the dragoon like a club, smashing the officer across the temple. The captain folded. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the wet sound of dying horses. Maverick reloaded with shaking hands. Smoke drifted over bodies in blue and buckskin. Tachi leaned against the boulder, blood pulsing between fingers pressed to his thigh. From the creek bed, Yuma looked up toward the rimrock, scar shining like a fresh brand, eyes locked on Maverick. Ellie stood beside her, face and dress ghost white with powder, small chest heaving. The sun cracked the eastern ridge, spilling fire across the valley. 4 Apache warriors lay dead. 7 soldiers would never leave the creek. The rest had fled into the dawn. Maverick walked down the slope, boots sliding in blood-wet sand. He stopped in front of Yuma. She didn't cover her face. Tachi's voice carried from above, hoarse but unbroken. "The wedding is today. The spirits have already tasted blood. They will not wait." Maverick looked at the scar, at the powder-dusted child holding the woman's hand, and nodded once. The sun stood straight overhead, merciless, turning the creek bed into a skillet iron. Flies buzzed thick over the dead. The living moved like sleepwalkers, women dragging blue-coat corpses to a common pit, warriors wrapping their own in blankets the color of dried blood. The smell was gunpowder, horse sweat, and the sweet copper stink that never quite leaves the air after a fight. Maverick's shoulder had been bound with a strip torn from a dead trooper's shirt. The bullet had only plowed a furrow, but it burned like a coal every time he breathed. Tachi sat on an overturned ammunition crate, while an old woman stitched his thigh with horsehair and sang under her breath to keep the ghosts away. He refused whiskey, drank water instead, and watched the sky. At the hottest hour, he rose, tested the leg, and spoke a single word that carried across the camp. Now. No one argued. Death had already come calling. Delaying a wedding would only invite it to stay for supper. They built the fire in the same clearing where the troopers had planned to plant their flag. Mesquite and ironwood cracked and spat, throwing sparks high enough to shame the stars that weren't out yet. The surviving warriors painted their faces black with charcoal and bear grease. Women beat small hide drums that sounded like slow heartbeats. Maverick washed the blood from his hands in a tin basin, put on the only clean shirt he owned, faded blue calico, once his wife's Sunday best, and stood barefoot in the dust because his boots were still soaked red. Ellie walked beside him, dressed stiff with dried powder and someone else's blood, but her chin was high and her wooden Colt tucked in the vest as it belonged there. Yuma appeared when the sun touched the western ridge. She wore the same white buckskin, now cut and smoke-stained, the veil hanging in tatters from her belt like a battle flag. The scar stood out raw and proud, a lightning bolt frozen on bronze skin. She carried no flowers, only the long skinning knife still dark from the night's work. The people formed a rough circle. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders to see. Even the wounded propped themselves against wagon wheels. Ta-Chi limped into the center, leaning on a captured Springfield like a crutch. The drums stopped. Heat shimmered. The air felt ready to ignite. He spoke in Apache first, then switched to English, so the white man would understand every word. I told the world my daughter was ugly. I made her hide her face for 8 years. Not because the scar shamed me, but because beauty without strength is a calf waiting for wolves. Men came, white, Mexican, even our own, offering horses, rifles, gold, wanting to own what the spirits had marked. I needed a man who would choose her blind, who would bleed for us before he ever saw her. I needed a son, not a buyer. His gaze swept the circle, lingered on the fresh graves, on the powder-streaked child, on the cowboy with the torn shoulder. Today, the spirits answered. They sent bullets first, then a man who stood in the firing line. The scar is no longer hidden. The land is no longer for sale. He turned to Yuma. With one slow motion, he lifted the torn veil from her belt and let it fall into the flames. It curled, blackened, vanished. Ellie stepped forward. The tin powder box was dented and empty in her small hands. She opened it anyway, dipped 2 fingers, and reached up. Yuma knelt. The child brushed the last traces of white across the scar, not to hide it, but to make it shine like fresh snow on red rock. When she finished, she looked straight at the silent crowd and said, clear as a rifle shot, "This ain't ugly. This is the bravest thing I have ever seen." A low rumble rolled through the warriors. Approval, pride, something close to prayer. Spears thudded butt first into the ground. Ta-Chi placed his right hand on Maverick's wounded shoulder, his left on Yuma's scarred cheek. By blood spilled this morning and fire burning tonight, you are husband and wife. The valley is yours to guard, not to own. Harm will come again. Next time we meet it together. He stepped back. The drums started, faster now, fierce. Someone began a song that had no words, only the sound of wind over stone and horses running. Maverick looked at the woman in front of him, scar blazing in the firelight, eyes steady, and felt something shift inside his chest, like a locked gate finally giving way. Yuma spoke for the first time, voice rough from disuse, but strong enough to cut the night. "You saw the worst of me first. You still here?" Maverick took her hand, felt the calluses, the dried blood under her nails. "Reckon the worst of you just saved my life," he said. "I'll take my chances on the rest." Ellie slipped between them, grabbed both their hands, and the 3 of them stood there while the fire roared higher and the desert wind carried the smoke toward tomorrow. 3 months later, the valley had changed its skin. Winter rain, rare and violent, had come once in October and turned the dry creek into a brief, roaring river. When it left, it scattered grass thick enough to hide a horse's knees. Cottonwoods along the new channel wore fresh green, like a woman trying on Sunday clothes. On the bench above the floodline stood a raw pine house, 2 rooms, a dog-trot breezeway, and a porch facing south, so the morning sun could walk straight in and warm the floorboards before anyone else woke. Maverick split the last shingle at dawn, hammer ringing against the rising wind. His shoulder scar had pulled tight into a pale rope, but it no longer burned. He drove the final nail, stepped back, and let the hammer hang from his belt while he studied the place he now called his own. Not bought, not stolen, earned with blood and kept with sweat. Inside, coffee boiled and venison sizzled. Ellie's voice carried through the open door, bossy and bright. "Hold still, Mama Yuma, or the braid'll come out crooked." Yuma sat on a 3-legged stool by the hearth, back straight, letting the child work a comb through her long black hair. The scar caught the firelight the same way it caught the now familiar sun, no longer hidden, no longer feared. Some mornings, Ellie still dusted it with the last grains from the battered tin, just enough to make it gleam like polished mahogany. Yuma never stopped her. She said the powder smelled like the little girl's mother, and that was medicine enough. Outside, the horse herd, 20 Apache ponies, and Maverick's old Dusty, grazed the new grass under the watchful eye of 2 half-grown wolf dogs the tribe had gifted on the day they rode away. Tachi's band had moved higher into the superstitions after the fight. The soldiers never came back, but memories have long legs. Still, every full moon, a rider appeared on the ridge with fresh meat or news, and every time he left with coffee, salt, and a sack of Ellie's terrible biscuits. Maverick stepped onto the porch. Yuma came out behind him, hair braided tight with a single eagle feather Ellie had found. She carried 2 cups. Steam curled between them like lazy smoke signals. "Scouts saw dust on the Tucson Road yesterday," she said. "Land office men. Surveyors." He took the coffee, tasted it black and strong. "Let 'em come. Paper doesn't mean much when the creek runs through your kitchen." She leaned against the post, scar toward the sun. "Tachi says if they bring soldiers again, we burn the grass and vanish. But I told him we would stay. This ground knows our names now." Ellie burst through the door, riding a broomstick Mustang, vest flapping, hat pushed back. "Pa! Mama Yuma says today I get to ride the gray mare bareback! Says I'm big enough!" Maverick raised an eyebrow at Yuma. "That's the same gray that threw me into the cactus last week." "The same," Yuma answered, mouth twitching. "Figured if an 8-year-old girl can stare down a scar and a cavalry corporal, she can sit a spoiled pony." Ellie whooped and vaulted the porch rail, landing cat-light in the dust. The gray mare lifted her head from the grass, ears pricked, already knowing trouble when it wore a tiny Stetson. Maverick watched his daughter run, boots kicking up clods, and felt the years of drifting fall away like old saddle sores finally healed. Yuma slipped her hand into his. Calluses met calluses. "Still think you only came for the land?" she asked. He looked at the house, herd, child, woman. Scar shining like a brand of ownership no deed could match. "I came for dirt," he said. "Found bedrock instead." Far off, heat waves danced over the valley floor, turning the world into hammered gold. A hawk hung motionless in the updraft, wings spread wide, riding the same wind that carried the smell of pine, tar, coffee, and horse sweat straight into tomorrow. Under that sun, nothing was hidden anymore. The scars, on the shoulder, on the cheek, on small hands that had once clutched only a wooden gun, caught the light and threw it back brighter than before. And the desert, for once empty, now held a house where 3 people had learned the same hard truth. Some things aren't bought or sold. They're fought for, bled for, and, when the smoke clears, simply kept. The smoke has settled over Silver Creek Valley. The scars have turned to silver, and 3 hearts that once rode alone now beat under one roof. If this story of blood, powder, and unbreakable courage hit you square in the chest, drop a comment and tell me. Which scar, visible or hidden, has made you stronger? Your words keep the fire going for every listener riding the trail behind you. Until the next sunset paints the desert red, keep your powder dry and your heart open. Ride safe, partners. We'll meet again when the wind carries another story worth telling. See you down the trail.